Most of you guys might know that I interact with my comments section pretty heavily, and this video is actually inspired by a viewer by the name of Mr5597, who asked a great question. And since I can't cover it briefly in a regular routine video, I'm dedicating this video to this question. We will primarily be looking at the best open world builds and instance content builds and try to answer what the best class is in Guild Wars 2. There are 3 that immediately came to mind, and I have a couple of honorable mentions, so let's get into it. First things first, what kind of video would this be without talking about the king themselves, the Firebrand? Guardians in general are pretty dominant because they have a lot of easy to understand, easy to apply stability, Aegis, and healing. They have a great open world build with Celestial gear, which is the booster gear, that basically makes them unkillable alongside being able to provide a decent amount of condition damage with a condition Firebrand build. In instance PvE content, the Firebrand is usually a healer and they excel there due to their versatility. They can bring a ton of CC, a ton of stability, or just raw healing. Firebrand build videos were actually some of the first videos that I ever uploaded, and they are still some of my favorite healers in in-game fractals and raids. They also have a very easy power DPS build with the power DPS Dragon Hunter, and they have a top of the benchmark charts DPS Condi build with the condition Willbender. So regardless of the level of player you are, you can usually find a build that works, even if you're talking about the more challenging challenge modes or harder raid wings. As far as impact, the Guardian and Firebrand have had a huge impact on the game as a whole, and most people have heard of the term Firebrand Jail in the past because of how much easier this class has made content. It defined the fractal meta for something like 5 years while it was the primary healer, and the only thing that really finally freed them was a build that is arguably better as a healer, which leads us into our next class, the Mesmer. Now, when I say the Mesmer, I primarily mean Chronomancer and Virtuoso. Right now, both of these specializations are top tier. Heal Chronomancer brings a bunch of healing, a bunch of stability, a bunch of CC, and the Mesmer utility like portals and blinks to the table. Before Firebrand was even a glimmer in ArenaNet's eye, the Mesmer mains were on death row. If they knew how to play Chronomancer, they were in Chrono Jail. These days, it's a lot more straightforward, but the Chronomancer has viable healing builds, viable boon DPS builds for power and Condi, and for the Virtuoso, they are the current king of cheese, where if you want an easy time in endgame content, you are going to want to learn to play Condi Virtuoso. And not much harder than Condi Virtuoso is Power Virtuoso, but both of these builds are extremely safe and have high DPS, so you can't really go wrong. For the open world, the Mesmer has a super strong open world build with the Celestial Mirage, and you can run it with either dagger or staff, and it is basically immortal. Mirage is also the Mesmer's kind of go-to PvP specialization, which is pretty fun, even though it is a shadow of its former self, and it is kind of paying for its own sins with the nerfs, if we're being honest. And the last of the big 3 that I'm going to bring up is none other than the Revenant. Now, the Rev is a special class, but the specialization that makes it up in the big 3 is the Herald, the king of boons. Now, Herald has gotten some love with its healing builds, its quickness DPS builds, and the Power Quickness Herald is a great open world build that is easy to play and super valuable in group metas, raids, fractals if you have an Alacrity healer. It is one of the higher benches as far as boon DPS classes with the Condition Quickness Herald, and it has seen a lot of love recently in serious legendary challenge mode groups. The Heal Herald has access to an infinite bubble, which basically makes fractals, raids, and strikes significantly easier and dealing with certain mechanics. If you don't mind getting comfortable with the resource management of the Revenant, then the Herald is the class for you. They have an amazing open world build in the form of the Celestial Condi Vindicator, which is truly immortal. They can solo almost everything with this build, from legendary bounties to the hardest hero points. Renegade is still useful and viable in the form of a Condi Alack DPS or a full Condi DPS class, but it has a very hard rotation that typically turns people off. It has a high APM rotation, and it is still a super fun class to play if you don't mind that high APM. It was often paired with a Firebrand and Fractals due to its large amount of utility and high DPS as a boon support. All three of these classes have a few things in common that make them stand out to me that I would like to share before we get into some honorable mentions. They all have access to high amounts of crowd control. They all have access to more or less on-demand group stability. And they all have functioning heal builds, DPS builds, and boon support builds. They all have an amazingly strong open world Celestial build that can be run with booster gear. And as we get into the honorable mentions, these classes are also super good, but they often lack in terms of stability access or have just been outscaled by one of these big three classes. The first honorable mention is going to be the Necromancer. The Scourge and the Reaper primarily are the two really good specializations. Heal Scourge is awesome, which still has its uses, and its main drawback is stability access and its limited amounts of CC. The Reaper, on the other hand, is just a great build for open world. It has about the same numbers as other power or Condi DPS classes, but without the extra utility that other classes bring. Most of the boons that it provides are self-only, so it makes it really good for solo play, but not so much for groups. In terms of solo play or casual group play, then the Necromancer is still a great class, and it does have its benefits with Epidemic and the ability to clear Condis, pull down states, and so on. For fights where stability isn't really needed, then the Heal Scourge is still an amazing build. And our next honorable mention is the Engineer. And while I think of this class, I am thinking of Scrapper. Scrapper has a ton of utility and CC that it can bring to the table, but it still has its holes. Quickness DPS Scrapper is one of my favorite builds to run in the open world, and this class has access to super speed, which makes it really valuable in certain applications. But that is just one benefit that doesn't really make it better than the big three, but more so just kind of a unique fit class. The Heal Mechanist has kind of fallen from glory and is outshined by almost every other healer at this point, and the Hollow Smith is just another DPS spec. And don't get me wrong, it's a really good DPS spec, but not really enough to carry the whole class. Outside of that, there are a few builds worth mentioning. The Power Fresh Air Tempest right now is really strong and good. Thief has a few good builds with the Deadeye and Daredevil. Ranger has Heal Druid and Power Soul Beast, which are both very good in their respective roles. And the Warrior has Power Spellbreaker, which is one of my personal favorite power DPS classes. So to round things up, in short, in 2024, there is usually something for every class in the game. I always advocate for multi-classing and playing a few different classes without worrying about what the meta is. But if you are going to gear up an alt and you wanted something highly valuable, then the Guardian, the Mesmer, or the Revenant are likely going to be the best choices. Even if one or two builds get nerfed, there will still be value in those classes regardless. And with that, I want to thank you for watching. Shout out to all of my subscribers, and a special thanks to Mr. 5597 for inspiring this video. If you have any comments or questions, drop them below. Hit the like button, and you have to hit the like button if you play one of the big three, or you could just hit it even if you don't. With that, I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.